Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very exclusive Nerdy Up North podcast episode. I have lost my train of thought already, and we have only 2 seconds in.
It's a start of something new.
It is. This is a exclusive series that me and Sam are doing. So we are going to be doing the world of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. I think that's better than saying Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon.
Game of Thrones and House
yeah,
because it's going to be Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but yeah, the world is created around that sort of universe.
Well, I am. Everyone knows me. I am from the Nerdy Up North community. I also co-host the podcast, and I'm going to go with Sam number one.
You're going with Sam number two. Yeah,
number one.
Okay.
And I also have my lovely co-host with me, Sam number two.
I am Sam number two. Even though I'm not Northern, I am still part of the Nerdy Up North community. I think I was one of the first non-Northerners in the group.
Oh wow! What a claim!
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
If anyone saw the charity podcast that we did, not last year before,
November 2021, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that.
You would have seen Sam doing an hour special on Game of Thrones, and me absolutely loving my life, and that's how this is all spun from. Is because Sam likes talking about Game of Thrones. I like talking about Game of Thrones, and I thought, why not start a Patreon exclusive all about Game of Thrones?
It seems the right sort of thing, and it's even more relevant than now than ever, really, with the return of the Game of Thrones universe with House of the Dragon.
And everything that's going to explode from it in the forthcoming years.
Yes.
Feels like we're just going to get so much more. So before we get into this first episode, which is literally just going to be an introduction to us, introduction to what we want to do, how we found Game of Thrones, just get all the then bits out the way with us. So in the next episode, we can literally just go into the topic at hand. So I will do the disclaimer and then we'll crack on. So everything discussed in today's episode is our opinions and our opinions alone. If you'd like to discuss anything from today's episode, please come and join us in the Facebook group where we can have an open discussion. What we won't have is anyone coming for us and telling us our opinions are wrong. We can all agree to disagree in fandom. So keep it fun, keep it kind, and keep the toxic behavior out of nerdism.
Yes.
That was also on the BBC, if anyone didn't know that.
I think it's important to have those sort of disclaimers, because I think a lot of people, when it is something you're very passionate about anyway, you do seem to forget that it is just your opinion about stuff. You know, we're talking about a fantasy universe.
Yes, and I think we have to remember that. It's fantasy.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. It's fantasy. We enjoy it. Remember that you enjoy it more so because of your opinions. So let someone else enjoy it because of theirs.
Yeah, exactly. And we can, like I say, we can all agree to disagree, but we can all keep it fun and friendly at the same time. And I think we're going to find that, because we're not always going to agree on everything.
Oh God, I can already tell now, looking at some of the topics that we've got lined up for future episodes, that there's going to be disagreements where we'll probably end up leaving these podcasts and we'll end up blocking each other, or just something until the next episode of this.
And then we're like, right, okay, I forgive you now.
I know, yeah.
I don't take things personally. And do you know what? I like to hear people's point of views, because then I can kind of reevaluate my point of view and think, oh, hang on a minute, I see where you're coming from.
I think this is a bit what this podcast is intended to be a little bit, because, yeah, we are talking about our love for something anyway, but which is something similar to what happened in the podcast when I came on. If you do go back and rewatch that on the YouTube channel, I think I was hour 7, something like that.
It was late on in the day.
I was bold, so if you see a bold guy, that was me, funnily enough. But that the topic and the discussions that we had, because I did focus a lot around season 8, which is, you know, debated, widely hated as well. If you can portray your opinions and your thoughts on something in a way that isn't antagonizing, and less like a statement, it does get other people thinking, you know, which can have people see things in different lights. I definitely know that over the course of rewatching Game of Thrones, I think I'm on my 4th run through now. of the
Oh,
entire
wow.
series, I think. There's characters that I loved at the start of it that I now can't stand.
Yeah, I've just gone through I can't count how many times I've gone through this season. I really can't. But you're absolutely right. And we will get into that when we talk about I'll get into it anyway, when we talk about how we found Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
So
100%.
So Sam, number 2, how did you find Game of Thrones?
Oh, well, I loved it. I mean, we spoke just before we started the recording that I came into it extremely late. I was very much one that I saw. I mean, I've loved fantasy forever. I wasn't going to come on the charity podcast to talk about Lord of the Rings, but
Oh my God.
it was the case that you'd just done a podcast about Lord of the Rings just before. That fate had it that it was Game of Thrones instead. But I came into it extremely late. I saw a lot of the hype around it, and I'm surprised I didn't watch it from the start. I just didn't, and everyone was ranting and raving about Game of Thrones, and I was just really uninterested, and I don't know why. And then I remember I had a long weekend off work, and I thought, you know what, let's get on with it. And I watched back to back the first 4 seasons, over the course of a long weekend, back to back to back, 10-hour seasons. I just sat and watched, and I completely fell in love. Completely and utterly fell in love. I'm not one for watching TV shows weekly because I just don't know why. I make myself wait even longer, which makes no sense. But I had to watch Game of Thrones as soon as it came out. I had to. I just fell in love with the storytelling. Again, this is another disclaimer. I've never read any of the books.
Yeah, let's get this out the way with right now. We are not book readers.
No. I don't do reading.
Yeah, and this series is not particularly going to follow the books, because as we know, the books have gone, there's certain parts of the books in the series. We're going to focus on the TV series.
Yeah, things will obviously encompass the books anyway.
Yeah, of course, and what we know, because we watch and we learn and we listen and we pick up things that from the book series. So there is things that I do know, so that will be included. But again, never read the books. Oh, actually, that's a big lie from me. I've read 2.
You're reading one right now, aren't you?
And I'm reading one right now. I'm really trying.
Yeah, that's I'm just a terrible reader. I've never read. I mean, some of the biggest fantasy franchises: Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. I've never read any of the books. I've read a couple of the Harry Potter ones, but I'm just not a big reader. And again, as Sam Wong said, we'll be looking. Things will be brought up about the book. We might talk in future about the differences between the book and the films from our knowledge or from our further reading from that. We'll read for the podcast, but we won't read for leisure.
Very true.
It is, yeah. But yeah, I think going back to my thoughts on the show, I think there's something in there as well for everybody. The arcs of all the different characters, the way the characters are portrayed. There's so many different villains that become heroes that become villains, straight up heroes, straight up villains. You've got the different houses that are very prominent. You've got backstory houses. You've got a lot of good world building throughout the entirety of the show. It follows it follows a lot of different storylines all at once as well. So it doesn't get boring because you go through one storyline and then automatically 5 minutes later you're picking up with another storyline, and they continue that very, very well until right at the end all of the storylines mash together, the ones that are still left outstanding anyway. And I just think it was what they did, the time and the effort that they put into the show for the vast majority of it, the characters as well, the actors. I can't name one character that had a bad performance. That was played by an actor where you thought could have been better. It just all felt. It almost felt like you're watching some sort of like history documentary to some degree.
Yes.
Because the way it was all done, and it was just great, and the whole. I think what makes it truly great is that even though, because I think we'd be doing this even if House of the Dragon wasn't even out.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what makes it so good, is that Game of Thrones finished a few years ago now.
Yeah.
and we're
I
still
have the
sat
date here
here.
somewhere.
I think it was
2019.
20 exactly. It's been coming up for 4 years since the end of the show, and we're still sat here talking about how much we love it. And I think that's what makes something on a wider spectrum, not just on a personal spectrum, just
Mhm.
shows how good a show really is. Because even
Yeah.
4 years after it's finished, people are still sat down and going, you know what, let's make a podcast talking
Yeah.
about why we love it.
When I pitched the idea, House of the Dragon never even crossed my mind.
Yeah, I
Never
forget it's
even.
there sometimes.
Yeah, me too. And it never even crossed my mind because I was so hell bent on I need to talk about this world, forgetting that is this world, like that it is part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I really, really love this show so much. This is why I wanted to do this. I'm exactly like you. I came into this quite late. Actually, that's a bit of a lie because I came in. We just moved into our first flat in 2012. Had no Sky or anything like that, nothing to watch. So a friend at work said, right, you need to watch this. You will love it. And it has, oh my God, why can't I think of his name? What's Ned Stark's character? Sean
Sean
Bean.
Bean.
Yes. And he was like, and it's got Sean Bean in it. And I was like, okay. And me and the husband watched it and just loved the first series. Don't think I got it straight away, if I'm honest.
Yeah, you don't.
No.
You just don't, because it's I think because the books had been out for so long before that anyway.
Yeah. They were
And
in the
people had read them.
90s.
I think, yeah, I think a lot of there's certain things in the story that you do need to do a little bit of reading on in the background, because it makes I think they got it just about right where it makes sense from the very, very first episode. You know, you see some big baddie, someone runs off, and then all of a sudden he's getting beheaded for being a traitor, and you're like, oh, this is where's that come from? And you sort of you kind of get the magnitude of the world that you're in as well, the reality of the world that you're in, but you don't quite understand exactly what it means when you see the Warden of the North and how he says the long speech about I'm the Warden of the North, condemn you to death and all, condemn you to die, all this sort of thing. And he sat there thinking,
what are you saying? What are you saying all that for?
Yeah, exactly. Why are you saying all that? Does that have some sort of further implication? But you still get it to a degree that, oh, okay, he's an important character. He's got a duty to do. You still get it, but you're not quite getting it.
I'm not totally fully immersed in it by the first series, but my husband is. Yeah. He's in it. He is completely in it. And he continues that without me right up until the Red Wedding. And so he's sitting, well, we were in a 1-bedroom flat, like bedroom here, living room here. And he walks into the bedroom after watching the Red Wedding, sat in the bed and just went, I don't get what I've just watched. What have I just watched? And he was absolutely traumatized. And I went, okay, so if this show can traumatize my husband this badly, am I missing out on something? So one, I always remember it. It was in October, and I always take time off in October from work because I don't do summer holidays. Like, I don't take time off because of like kids and stuff. I don't have kids or anything like that. So October is my holiday time. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to go season 1 to season 3 because that's where we were just up to. And that's it. That's when I got it. And my God, this is just me all over. When I fall in love with something, I take it to such an extreme that people get really sick of me very quickly.
Yeah. That's the way of the nerd, though, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I found a Facebook group. It was a Game of Thrones Facebook group. And on a Sunday night, I think season 4 was starting. And on a Sunday night, I met a bunch of people from all over the world, a couple of Americans, Sanjeev, who's from India. There was another guy from Finland. There was a whole group of us, and we would sit on a Sunday night on this Facebook group, and we would literally just lay into everything that we'd been watching. And we soon started pissing people off because we weren't the biggest fan of Stannis at the time. And oh my God, didn't realize Stannis had such a big fan group. And we ended up getting booted out of this Facebook group because of this. And me, Caroline, Kerry and Sandeep decided, you know what? We're going to start our own. And we do. I have a Game of Thrones Facebook group that has over nearly 9,000 members. And it's still going strong today. It's still got posts coming through regularly, especially there was a period of time, there was a lull when a lot of memes were coming in. And that's because there was not a lot of news after. I think we had such a reaction after the last series that when that started to die down, loads of memes just started coming through and piling through. And now House of the Dragon, it's starting to build its momentum again. But I've had this group since 2014.
I didn't even know about that. I'm not even in the group. Yeah. You've never told me about this group.
I'm so sorry. I do, because I sometimes forget about it, because Nerdy Up North is like my thing now, and I occasionally go and jump on and say, hi everyone, like, how you doing, what we're talking about. And I have a Game of Thrones group that I've had for some time now.
See, this is the first problem that me and Sam have got already. We're not even talking about Game of Thrones properly yet.
No, that's true. That's true. But I just fell in love with I think it's more the people. I'm such a people person. Like when I watch a TV show, I'm watching it I can cling on to one person. The show can be absolutely terrible, but if I gravitate to one person and follow their story, I give you an example. American Horror Story, Hotel. Not the biggest fan of the show, like the whole season.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth Taylor, the character, I effing love that character so much that I followed. It was, oh gosh, Francis, what's his face? He was all dragged up. Can't think of his name. He was transgender.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I just gravitated so much towards this character that I followed their journey. And I love that show because of them. I love people. Yeah. And then I got people on top of world building.
And this is the thing with Game of Thrones, is that you can go through and watch it and you can pick out 10 recurring characters that are in probably start to finish, at the very least 10.
Mm-hmm.
They're in it start to finish. That's across all 8 seasons, and they're in majority of episodes. You could skip every other part apart from this character, and you can go through and watch an arc and focus on an arc for each different character every single time. You're talking, I mean, there's 2 Stark kids. They're in it start to finish. You've got Jon Snow. You've got Daenerys. You could even follow Jorah. You can follow Tyrion, Jaime, Cersei. The list goes on and on and on of these people that you can follow.
Mm-hmm.
Another Samwell Tarly. You know.
Yes. I was thinking before I come on, I was like, he can be Samwell and I'll be Samwise, but then that doesn't make sense because Samwise is not in this fantasy realm. So blew that one out the water.
We'll just stick with Sam 1 and 2.
Sam 1 and 2.
Until we either think of something else or someone mentions something else.
Yeah, until we think of any like catchy names or
exactly. Yeah. But it is just one of those that you can, but not only start to finish, you can also see characters that maybe aren't as prominent in the first couple of seasons. They appear, but their story isn't quite there. Then it picks up, like the Hound, for instance. He's there at the start, and then all of a sudden you follow his story and you learn more about. A lot of people at the very start hated the Hound. As soon as he left after the Battle of Blackwater Bay, was it Blackwater Bay?
It was, yeah.
He storming the mud gates and all that sort of stuff.
I'm trying really hard not to swear, but it's really hard when it comes down to like the Hound, because he literally fucked off and left.
I think potentially we can allow maybe 1 or 2 swears just in it. We're talking about Game of Thrones.
That's true.
There's a lot of profanity, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of violence, and sometimes you just kind of have to.
That's true.
And your reactions to it. But yeah, people like the Hound, where they're not as prominent in the first little tiny part of the show, first period of the show, then there's everybody towards the end of the show loved the Hound. I don't think there was anybody that hated the Hound by the end of the show.
Yeah.
But then you've got people that are very prominent at the start of the show, but then do sort of fade off and then all of a sudden reappear or just disappear kind of in its entirety because they go off and do other things. But then you've also got characters that will appear here, there, and everywhere, and they'll pop
Yeah.
up at random times. And I think that's with the characters that there are so many, and depending on how you want to watch a show, you're sort of favorite. I mean, it's like one of my favorite characters. He's in for like 5 minutes of the show.
Okay.
Arthur Dane.
He is so loved, and I didn't get it.
How do you not get it? The story behind their house. So he is my favorite character. My second favorite character ever. I mean, this will appear on our list further down the line.
Yeah, and you can go into
But I
like
have
great
to-
detail on it, but I need to know.
I have to have two because with Arthur Dane, he's in it for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
Doesn't really say much. The story behind the house, it's cool. The sword is cool. Everything like that. But because he's not really in it, I kind of have to have another favorite.
Yeah, I get
It's
that.
Robb Stark.
Wow.
Yeah. I every time they start doing things, and that was the first time you heard King of the North, and it's rallying, and you're thinking, I've got goosebumps talking about it now. You start hearing
I kind of got a bit of a chill when you said his name.
you kind of because he, again, major spoiler warnings throughout this entire time.
Yeah.
Because he dies off so quick. I mean, to be fair, we can't really put spoiler warnings on that. We might do for House of the Dragon if we review an episode, but
Yeah, if we were I think House of the Dragon now, it's out there and it's been out for a bit now.
yeah,
We will spoil the shit out of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. But if we're coming into new territory, we will be respectful.
100%, because you can still enjoy the show even with knowing certain parts, because it's
Yeah.
never the full story, and there's also something else to shock you that's never mentioned. But people forget about how big an impact Robb Stark was at the sort of beginning, because of how quickly he dies off and how he's not there for the rest of the show. You forget about it, and it was almost like we'd heard a lot of talk about Robert's Rebellion, a lot of talk about it, and then all of a sudden you've got Robb Stark creating a Northern uprising, and he's starting to win battles. Even Tywin Lannister, who, I could talk for days about Charles Dance because he is phenomenal.
Yes.
But as far as, because he's got even him, because all the other Lannisters are going, oh yeah, well, we're Lannisters, and we've got this in the bag, and Tywin's like, we're actually losing this, by the way. You do know that, don't you?
We need to be scared of this wolf.
Yeah. And then, he was he was Ned's perfect son, because he was exactly like Ned. He was a very devout person. He knew his sort of duties and stuff like that. But the problem was because of his youth, he didn't quite understand the world in its entirety. And that's how the whole Red Wedding happens. And that's the second massive shock of the Game of Thrones series, but arguably the biggest.
Yes.
And you sat there, like when your husband came into, you sat there after that episode, and you just sat there like,
I've never seen shock like it. Like he was pale, and he was like, I can't believe what I've just watched. Like he was, and to explain it to us, I didn't get it because I wasn't in it with them. But when I watched it myself, I was ready for it. But you're still not ready for it.
You're still not. I still hate it every time because I love Robb Stark so much. Because, I mean, can you imagine because I think this is something that potentially I could add to our little wheel that we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
Is, for instance, if Robb didn't die, what would have happened?
So good. Yeah, add that to the wheel.
Because you can only obviously ever speculate anyway. I think it probably would have gone a bit Pete Tong at some point, obviously, but it just would have, because usually I think this is the shock factor that everyone regard, because this is the first show for me anyway, where you watch it and you can't predict where anything is going to go at all. And I think that's what grabbed people as well, because they were like, I finally got a show. Even people that don't really like fantasy, they were like, I finally got a show. They're just so unpredictable. I can be gripped to because I don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
The heroes always live in every other single show. The villains will either die then come back. In this show, Everything's all up in the air. Everything is
it
everywhere
is.
else.
And it's you talk about like people who are not into fantasy. My parents are not into fantasy. My mum's like sci-fi. My dad is a very complicated person.
In general.
He's lovely. He's an artist, he's a baker, he's so many things. But when it comes to watching, he just likes an easy watch, something that's just easy. But he started Game of Thrones. And to this day, if you ask him, Michael, tell us about Game of Thrones, he could not tell you one thing, but he knew he loved it. And he's actually starting to watch it again, because what I'm going to do when we know the topic we're going to be talking about, I'm going to get my dad's opinions on it and read them on the podcast, because it's going to be interesting from someone from a non-fantasy point of view, what they think about it. And also to see if he actually is paying attention, because he has watched it nearly twice now. And we even had for the first, so my mum and dad were like 1 to 7. They binged it, absolutely binged it. So ready for season 8, we had a watching party at my house, and because there's some of my family are into it, my best friends into it, and we put a spread on, and I will find the pictures and post them to Facebook at some point when this is all aired and people are know about it, because some of the names were fantastic. It was like the rest of Tyrion, and it was like a sausage roll, and Sansa's salsa, and Hodoritos, which was my favorite. Hodoritos. Muffin Jon Snow.
Muffin. This is more thought went into that than actually making the food, really, didn't it? The thought about what are we going to have. We'll just put specific names on.
My auntie made a red wedding cake, and it was a red velvet with white icing and just blood all the way down it, and it was absolutely fantastic.
That does sound fantastic. It sounds messy, but
it was beautiful.
Before we go further, if anyone with people that are listening to this, if you haven't watched Game of Thrones or anything like that, and you're just interested about the universe, you've seen bits and bobs, go through and do a proper run through, because then you can sort of relate to what we are talking about. And obviously, we don't want to spoil things for anybody, because it's not the nicest.
No.
But even what we talk about anyway, it's not necessarily a complete spoiler, because the depth behind what happens to the characters, to the situation, is so much more that can ever be discussed.
Yeah, you're 100% right. We can talk about a certain place in the series, but to watch it, to experience it, to live it is a completely different thing.
It's a very personal thing.
It is, and you're 100% right. It is, but I find that a lot with pop culture, regardless of the series, it is a personal thing, and what we might bring to it would be something different that you might take from it. So I totally understand what you're saying there.
1,000%, because that's partly, what this podcast is about as well, is going through that sort of thing to give our opinions, because then you can think about what we're saying, then conflict with whatever you want to say. If you do want to discuss it, obviously within the agreements, because if you want to, obviously you could share it to your Game of Thrones group as well. There could be discussion threads and stuff.
Never even thought of that. This is how much
There's 9,000 people in the group. Come on!
I totally forget
Game
about
of Thrones
it.
group as well, that you could just share to say, hey, I was one of the creators here. Go check out my podcast. But if you want to discuss things wherever it is, this will mostly be related to the Nerdy Up North group anyway. But if we do get some sort of discussion with Sam's other group, then we're more than happy to have discussions about things. Obviously, we keep it to a certain degree, and if we don't agree on things, you don't agree on things. It's not a problem, but that's the engagement factor of these sort of podcasts. It's not just us sat here waffling. I mean, it's great to just sit here and waffle, but
and I can.
Oh God, yeah, tell me that. I can for England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, every other country that's in existence. But it's those sort of discussions, because what you can do is that what I found as well is that for all nerdy sort of things or whatever it may be, if someone gives you a different sort of idea, I'll go back and rewatch something or reread something to see if I can see it from a different sort of light. So if we, for this, I think we should probably get into it next about what we're hoping to do before we waffle on for ages and forget about
the plan.
The plan, the introduction. I mean, I might as well just say now, because we will be going through. We've got a little wheel that I've created, and again, people can input things if they want to see a certain topic, and we agree to it. We can add it to the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a wheel with tons of stuff on here about what the topic of next episode is going to be.
Yeah.
And
so it gives us a chance to get our knowledge up.
To discuss things, to go more in depth with things, give reviews on things, whatever it may be. In future, if people think it might be a good idea, we can do a run through of episodes. You know, if we get a particular episode that we do a poll and someone wants us to go, a certain number of people want us to go for an episode, we have zero problem sat here watching an episode of Game of Thrones, because we can do a running. we could do like either like a running commentary style sort of thing, or we can just watch the episode. You can get our reactions to it, because I still get the same reactions every single time I watch it.
Yeah, me too. And there's no difference from first viewing to millionth viewing. I'm still living like I've not seen it before, and I don't know why. I live like, it's really hard to describe sometimes.
I think it's the depth of it.
Yeah,
it's the depth, because of going back to what I said about the depth of the characters and the situation. Is that, and this is my standpoint on season 8, which will come up at some point. I do mention it in the charity podcast if you do want to go and watch that segment, because I do go over it quite a bit on my opinions, because I have a different consensus from most people.
You do, and I'm hoping that through discussion and through rewatching that I might get on board with that.
Yeah, that's what it's about, because it is when you rewatch things as well, because you already sort of know as a whole what's coming. You end up picking up extra bits that you didn't notice before, because the original factor of what you've seen, you already know it's coming. So you're looking out, you start noticing other details, other little bits and bobs.
You don't have to focus your attention on one thing,
exactly.
the one thing you think you're meant to be watching, because there's so much more going around it. I think I was incredibly bitter, and I think bitterness overtook the actual viewing of it and taking it for what it was. So I am actually going to rewatch the 8th season just to see, and I'm going to let a few episodes go by first before I start doing it, just to see how our conversations can help and not persuade either, because I will literally go on what I'm looking at, but just to see if it changes, to see if I can get on board with season 8.
Some people, it's always going to be the case that some people will just, regardless of what direction, because it all comes down to opinion as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm very, when it comes to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love hard when it comes to shows and my nerdy interests and stuff like that. I really do love hard. So sometimes that can blur the lines of what is actually good and what isn't actually good, because I love it. But
that is very much me too.
Yeah, you can sort of appreciate where other people are coming from when they do say it's bad. Don't get me wrong, season 8 is not up there as one of the better seasons.
Nope.
I'm never going to say anything like that, because it's just not. It was a very, very the run time was actually the same length as any other season, because there were longer episodes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but the storyline is what was rushed. It could have been spread out longer than what it was, but it was rushed, and we know the reasons why it was rushed.
Yeah, I want to get my rant out of the way with now, because I want this just to be a one and done thing. And actually it's probably a 3 and done thing by now. We did one of our first episodes was favorite TV shows, and obviously Game of Thrones came up. It's one of my favorite TV shows. But I went on this huge rant about the showrunners, and it really overtook what I was trying to portray was love and affection into I fucking hate D&D, and I'm so glad that they got everything taken away from them, because the piss poor writers and they fucked it all up. And I literally went on this massive tirade of abuse to them. I am not their fans.
Tweets and all sorts.
I am not their fans. I don't agree with, regardless of how season 8 planned out. What they should have done is fucking own it. If that's how they wanted to play it out, just own it. Own what you did and say, yeah, we take on board what you're saying, but this is our show. This is what we put out, and this is what you're getting. But what they did was fucking run and hide, and they left a cast and crew to deal with the backlash of people being upset over decisions they made.
Yeah, and that's
what Narc does. And this is the only time I'll mention it.
But I think that's the sort of where the lines blur in the opposite direction from me. Whereas a lot of people, especially in today's age, when it comes to shows, I mean, I touch upon Rings of Power as well. I loved that. I thought it's the first show since Game of Thrones that's got me wanting more. And I was in a lot of different Lord of the Rings groups that I'm in and stuff like that. And there was so many discussions. And people are so caught up in their hate that they won't see anything else. You know, some people would have watched half season 8 and gone, no, I hate all of it. They would have watched it on one run through. If you go into anything just solely hating because you know it's going to be bad, it's never going to get any better ever. Whereas if you go in with a sort of half open mind of, you know what, I know this is going to be bad, but I'm going to see what I can look for that's potentially good, or try and link it to previous seasons.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done on previous run-throughs, and why I generally am a big advocate of season 8 is nowhere near as bad as a lot of people make out. You know, season 8 did not ruin Game of Thrones.
No.
Season 8 ended Game of Thrones because it was the last season and it was rushed. But when I say Game of Thrones, the show Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Because we know now that the universe of the Song of Ice and Fire, I don't even know if that's right. I know, like, it's Westeros. That's where we're at. That's the main place. But do we just call it a Song of Ice and Fire? Because we're still in a Song of Ice and Fire right now, the House of the Dragon.
It goes into Fire and Blood, doesn't it, at this point? With it, again, this is where my book knowledge becomes a bit bad, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, it's not the case if I just refuse to read the books. I really want to. Look, I've got the Da Vinci Code sat next to me, by the way, on my shelf.
Holy shit, you mentioned that on the podcast, the charity podcast?
I've read up to page 61 and that's it. And I've had this next to me for a good 2 years now.
You mentioned it on the charity podcast when you put your disclaimer. I've not read the books and I've got the Da Vinci Code sat here. Oh my God.
It used to be on my bedside table.
Yes.
It's now next to me on a shelf next to my desk as I redecorated. And it's there. It's in my eyesight. I see it and I'm just blank to it. And I don't want it to be like that with Game of Thrones, because I think it would lessen my love for it a little bit.
It possibly will, because it's a long haul. And it's with the show visually, it's easy to jump from one point of view to another. The books are all point of views. Yeah. And every chapter is a point of view of each person. And sometimes I actually find it hard to go from one point of view to then stop to the next. Don't get us wrong. Fire and Blood is not like that. Fire and Blood is actually
a history textbook, isn't it?
It is. And it's so nobody got on my level with this when I mentioned it, especially me mum. Like, I was so excited and I was like, Mum, the front of the book explains that these are the notes and the research by this Maester, what's his face, and it's George R.R. Martin taking his information and putting it into a history book. And I was like, how fucking clever is that? And she was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, she just, and I was so excited with it. It was just how clever it was done. It was like, these are the notes and researches of Maester. I will find his name out at some point. They are George R.R. Martin has transcripted them for your knowledge purpose or something like that.
He's broken the fourth wall of his own character.
He did, and it's a history textbook. I have read the first 2 books. And I purposely wanted to really slug through Sword of Storms. Is that the second one?
I've got absolutely no idea.
The second book, because I love the second series. I absolutely adore the second series of Game of Thrones. Absolutely. And that is initially what turned me off, was the second series. Now when I rewatch it, I'm like, what was I thinking? This is just genius.
It sets up a lot of the rest of the show that you don't even realise it.
It gives Tyrion power that he got in that season and has never reclaimed it again. It breaks my heart, but that is character growth. That is a character growth for him, and I absolutely love that. And I will get into Tyrion at great length at some point, but I've lost my train of thought again. I get so excited. I need to curb this.
But then this is the whole reason for the podcast. And like I said, we've got a wheel. We've got a load of. We've got 20 different things that I've put on there now.
Right. So shall we wrap today up and decide on what we're doing for next episode?
100%. And like I said, anyone that wants to make a comment on it in the Nerdy Up North community, or even if Sammy does pop it into the other Game of Thrones chat, wherever you see this podcast potentially shared, if you want to put your input on it, go ahead. And if we like the idea, we're more than happy to put it on the wheel. This wheel is basically just to try and help us stream, because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
It's almost a way to help streamline and make decisions for us, so we're not in a bad place with going, what do we do?
And we're not getting carried away.
Yes.
Like I can. Generate it up.
Mouse would work. My mouse has decided that it doesn't want to work.
Oh, your mic's gone now. Yeah.
There we go. I'm muting
You're
myself.
back.
It was on the wrong one.
Oh, his face.
You know what? This is potentially a very, very good starting point for the very first full episode, really, because it encompasses pretty much the entire history of the show.
Oh, okay.
The Targaryen bloodline.
Oh, we are going with the dragons.
So some of these points that are on this wheel, I don't know how to share for everyone else to see the wheel.
If we find a way to, you've got to have to trust. I trust Sam number 2, because I know how passionate he is about doing this project with me. So I totally 100% trust him. But if we do figure out a way to show you the wheel, we will.
We will. I think it might be something to do with sharing permissions. But hey ho, it doesn't really matter, because it's almost like pulling things out of a hat. It's just a big wheel. I've spun it. Wheel of names. Yeah, Targaryen bloodline. So they are just obviously points as to topic of conversation.
Yep.
And this could be realistically anything that we can find that we like, that we don't like, what sort of directions we would have liked it to have gone during Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, or even potentially storylines that we would have liked to have been picked up. You know, things like Duncan. I think there might be a small spin-off series, Duncan and Egg. Duncan the Egg.
Yes.
Whichever the ones.
Yes. And I'm going, because I've heard this so many times, especially I follow a lot of people who are heavily into the Game of Thrones community and House of the Dragon, and it gets brought up quite a few times. And I'm sitting there going, have I missed something?
See, it's brought up and mentioned in both Game of Thrones and both TV series. It has been brought up, and there have been mentions and talks that it is going to be made into like a little short series. I think it's one of the ones that might go forward, but I know that a lot of the shows have been shelved until further notice. But just about that Targaryen bloodline, it encompasses from the very start of the realistic history of Westeros that isn't very vague, you know, children in the forest, that sort of thing, because that far back is quite vague. More recent history, because Aegon's conquest, everyone seems to forget, was only something like 100 years before House of the Dragon.
It was, because obviously Balerion is Aegon's dragon, and Balerion the Dread. Is it Balerion the Dread?
Balerion the Black Dread, yeah. Viserys was his last rider.
Yes. And I have just read all about the conquest and how bloody awful it was.
Absolutely madness. And this is the sort of thing of the bloodline that we can talk about, is what they've done, characters in particular, because the reason why this was put onto the list was when we were talking, obviously, prior to recording, we mentioned about, you know, with Sammy reading the books, it was very much, you know, the Targaryen madness. Is that a product of
Yes.
incest? Is that just a dragon curse? What is? And this is why these topics are good. I think it'll be good for
Yeah.
a podcast discussion, because there's so much to pick up on that we can just take little snippets for ourselves and discuss what we found and what we like, what we don't like, what we could have been done.
Yeah, what we find indifferent about it, what we
exactly.
Just a whole big bunch of talk about crazy Targaryens.
Exactly, and there's so much to go on about it. I think that there's plenty of us, because we might have one or two things that we find on our list, but
yeah,
there's going to be so much more that we don't. Because again, another big thing, which I'm definitely going to actually bring up, so that we can't steal this one because this has already been decided upon, is Maester Aemon.
Oh yeah.
Not only that though, the Three-Eyed Raven, because he was part of the Targaryen bloodline.
If you want to go that far, we can talk about the Baratheons as well, because
exactly.
they're part of the Targaryen bloodline too.
Is part Targaryen. Why did he hate the Targaryens? That, things like that. And this is something that, to be fair, we could probably end up just leaving this one on the wheel.
There's so much that goes with it, and I think that's the genius of doing House of the Dragon, because it doesn't start with them. It doesn't. But King's Landing starts with them. You don't have King's Landing if you don't have the Targaryens and you don't have Aegon's conquest, because King's Landing was nothing. Again, that is content for next week.
100%. It is one of those that is very much a hot topic for a lot of different things, because things that I think that do need to be brought up probably a bit more in other things, and with further readings from everybody that watches the show or even just reads the book. Because if you read the books and don't watch the show, there's still parts of Game of Thrones universe that you're missing out on.
Yeah.
And there's so much that can be hinted at in the show that wasn't hinted at in the books. It was mentioned, because it's still history. It's just in different forms and in different means.
Yeah. It's going to be a very interesting series, one that I am really, really excited to get my teeth into. And I'm excited on like a personal level to explore more. Like visually, I can talk I can talk about what I've seen, but to explore it more in depth, to then have a discussion about it, that's what I'm really looking forward to, that side of it.
Yeah, I think this is what, with the difference between the main podcast anyway and this podcast, is that the main podcast week by week is going to be different topics, but it spans such a massive diverse universe of nerd culture, pop culture, anything like that, because Paul and yourself and other guests that are on there, you guys love so much. I mean, the charity podcast was just one of them. There is so many different things. Over 12 hours, there was not one topic that was even vaguely similar to the last.
No, it was not. It was so different.
It is. And this is the great thing with nerd culture, is that you can be nerdy about literally anything as long as you have enough passion for it.
Yes.
And that's the beautiful thing. But with this podcast that is more directed, it means that we can go more and more in depth for everybody else that loves the Game of Thrones universe, because we can discuss things that might not be brought up or be able to be brought up in just a short one-off episode.
That's it. And this,
think of the Nerdy Up North podcast as Game of Thrones, and we're House of the Dragon. We're a spin-off, but with the same thing, just going a bit more in depth on stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of the co-hosts is in it, so it's
exactly.
Yeah. So we'll wrap up today. What was I going to mention? Oh yeah, my other podcast, the Nerdy Up North one. We do a live episode every Sunday, and for the foreseeable, we will be doing other episodes that involve very special guests. There's no point in mentioning tonight's episode, because this will not be available for you to view before tonight. This series is an exclusive for Patreon. However, it will be added to the added to the YouTube page 2 weeks after it's been aired. So Patreon users get it first, and then everyone else gets it later on.
A little bit later, yeah, to give it a fair chance because it is an exclusive and stuff like that.
Yes.
Who knows? You might find myself on the Normal Nerdy podcast at some
Yes.
point.
Yes, you will.
Oh, will
At
I?
some point.
This is the beauty of it, is there's so many people, because there's still a lot of people in the Nerdy Up North group anyway that want to get on it. For everyone else, Grant, well, I can't remember Grant's last name now.
It's just Grant. Just call him Grant.
That's
You know Grant. He's been on our regular podcast so many times. He is a regular.
Yeah.
He's very much loved in the community. He will be joining us from time to time with his schedule permitting, because he still to this day goes on about how much he loves Sam's Hour when we did the charity podcast. To this day, he is very much into fantasy, which shocked the life out of us, because when I think of Grant, I think of horror and I think of music, and I did not think of fantasy, and I don't know why. But yes, Grant will be joining us from time to time, and we may get other people on at some point. It's
random. I've got someone I work with that probably love to be on the podcast as well. I'm pretty sure I'll get her definitely on the listening to the podcast at the very, very least, because she's we've had conversations at work about Game of Thrones and stuff like that as well.
Bring those conversations to the mic.
Definitely, it's just so interesting, and this is definitely a form of, because I mean, before that charity podcast, I've never really spoken to anybody about my nerdy loves and wants, because I'm not from that sort of family, or friendship group for that matter either. I am that one person that's obsessed with everything.
You're in the right place with the right company.
100%. Now we're doing this. I mean, how long ago was it you asked me to do this now? It's probably a month ago now, wasn't it?
A month ago, yeah. You were the first person I thought of.
Yeah, I got you. Let me get on it.
The first person I thought of. Because
I'll quit work if I have
to. I wanted to do something special for Patreon. And I was branching out on my own, because I've done every episode with Paul. And I'm not going to lie, I was really nervous to start with. Like, my nerves have gone now, but I was really nervous to start with, because I have Paul, and I've always had Paul, but now Paul's gone and it's somebody else. And oh my God. But I'm totally fine with that. But yeah, I wanted to do something special for Patreon. And when I mentioned doing something in fantasy, people were like, yeah, we want fantasy. And I was going to do something on Lord of the Rings, which would be amazing, but I'm looking at longevity here. I'm looking at spanning this out over a period of time, and Lord of the Rings isn't something I could do for a long time. I love it, and I feel like we could encompass that along the way, kind of, but to do like a proper series and give it justice, I feel I would fall short.
Yeah, I think that with Lord of the Rings, because of how long the films have come out, I mean, obviously, you've got the books, and you've got, again, like Game of Thrones, you've got a massive amount of backstory and history that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote about. But I think that sort of nerdy phase, especially in the current climate, you've got things that have been set in stone for quite a while, and again, in the current climate, things are very, very toxic in that community. Extremely. And the only real conversations that could be had, there's not as much opinions in the Lord of the Rings compared to Game of Thrones, because it's a TV show compared to films and books. TV shows and books have way more about them, because there is just so much more content. You've got to remember, the very first season of Game of Thrones is pretty much the same length of time than the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yes, it is. Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Game of Thrones, as far as TV show goes, trumps the stuff that you can watch for Lord of the Rings by about 30-40 hours.
Yeah.
So there's a lot less to go on, and a lot more of it is established, a lot less up for discussion.
Yeah.
Oh, give me your opinions on Legolas. Well, everybody loves Legolas. What about Gandalf? Everybody loves Gandalf. What about this? Everybody loves them. Whereas in Game of Thrones, it's very often that you'll meet people that don't like the same people.
Yeah. And we're going to find all that out in the forthcoming weeks. And
Really
I'm really, really looking forward to it. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for joining us on Patreon. Again, our live shows are on Sunday night at 7:30. You can find our community page on Facebook. Just search Nerdy Up North. We are also on social media, Instagram and TikTok, which I run. And yeah, Thank you, Sam number 2.
That's all right. Yeah. When do we? Because I don't even know when the next one of these ones is coming out. I don't
know.
think we're not very prepared for this. We not even spoke about potential for next one.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out, and I will make sure that it is well advertised of when the next episode's coming out.
100%, yeah, and that will obviously be all about the Targaryen bloodline and whatever the two Sams really want to come up with and go into.
Yes.
Again, it could be something you like, could be something you've never even heard of.
Could be something crazy.
More than likely so. It is the Targaryen. It is the Targaryen bloodline. Crazy is basically what you inherit.
It's the name of the game.
Oh,
should be the name of the house, actually, but that's another thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you everyone for watching, and stay nerdy, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.